The clock on the wall ticks slowly, each second amplified in the dead silence of the dimly lit office. I sit here, a man who once believed in loyalty, in trust, now drowning in resentment, with nothing left to hold on to. I glance at the marriage counselor sitting across from me, a woman with a carefully practiced calm in her demeanor, her patient smile betraying nothing of the boredom she must feel after years of listening to fractured couples. Her voice is measured professional as she turns to me. "Mr. Johnson, why do you believe you're here today?" I exhale, fighting the urge to laugh. Why are we here? Because of the broken promises that led to our broken life. I don't answer right away, letting my gaze drift to the woman next to me. Ruby, my wife of 17 years, or rather the woman who used to be my wife. Her eyes are rimmed red, tears stray, her face drawn as though she hasn't slept in days. She seems smaller now, her shoulders hunched, her hands fidgeting with a tissue. Once those hands held mine. Once those eyes lit up when she looked at me. Now I feel like a stranger in this room with her. As if everything we built together has vanished. And maybe it has, Thomas. The counselor, Dr. Helen Weaver, prompts again, her tone gentle but insistent. "I'm here because the court made it a condition of our divorce." I say flatly. I don't add anything else. My purpose is clear. I want this marriage dissolved, and I don't need Dr. Weaver's opinion to sway me. I hear a quiet intake of breath from Ruby. She turns slightly, her voice trembling. "Dr. Weaver, I don't want this divorce," she murmurs as if saying the words would somehow mend the shattered pieces between us. "I just want one more chance." Her words twist something in my chest, but I push it down. She's had her chances. Every single one of them, in fact. And she threw them all away. Dr. Weaver studies us both. Her eyes kind but piercing. "Thomas, would you consider Ruby's request? One more chance to make things right." I shake my head slowly. There's no making this right. You don't just tear someone apart and expect them to sew it all back up again like nothing happened. Ruby sniffles beside me, her hands shaking as she dabs at her eyes. For a moment, I wonder if the tears are genuine or just part of a carefully constructed performance. But then that's part of the problem. I don't know if I can believe anything she says anymore. Dr. Weaver sighs, glancing between us. "I understand these feelings are raw and this isn't easy for either of you. But could we start with understanding how you both arrived at this point? Perhaps if we explore the past, we can find common ground." Ruby nods eagerly, her voice a mere whisper. "Please, Thomas, let's just talk just this once." I fold my arms, feeling the weight of 17 years pressing down on me. "Fine. If she wants to talk, let's talk." Our lives together started simply quietly with shared dreams and early mornings in a cramped apartment where every creak of the floorboards and every hum of the refrigerator was a comforting reminder that we had each other. We both worked long hours juggling responsibilities and hoping that someday things would get easier. But we were young and being together made even the hard days feel like part of a grand adventure. And then we had our first child. Our daughter Sophie came into our lives like a force of nature, bringing joy and exhaustion in equal measure. I threw myself into my work, hoping to provide a stable life for our growing family. While Ruby devoted herself to being a mother, we made it through the sleepless nights. The early mornings, the relentless demands of parenthood. We were a team bound by love and a shared commitment to our family. But as the years passed, the weight of daily life settled on us. And something in Ruby began to change. She grew distant, restless. I would come home from work to find her sitting on the couch, staring at the television, lost in a world that didn't include me. At first, I thought it was just stress or exhaustion. I thought it would pass, but it didn't. Instead, She became absorbed in a late-night drama series, obsessing over a character played by Chandler Green, an actor with a chiseled jaw and a charming smile who seemed to embody everything she felt was missing in her life. I tried to ignore it, dismissing it as a harmless fantasy, a way for her to escape the monotony of everyday life. But deep down, I could feel a gulf widening between us. I look over at Ruby now, seeing traces of the woman she used to be. The woman I fell in love with, the woman I built a life with. But that woman is gone, replaced by someone I barely recognize. I still remember the night I realized just how deep the chasm between us had grown. It was our anniversary, a night I had planned down to the last detail, hoping to rekindle the spark that once brought us together. I booked a reservation at her favorite restaurant, even reserved a hotel room for a rare night away from the kids. I wanted it to be special, a reminder of why we fell in love in the first place. For the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of the old Ruby. She laughed, she held my hand, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe that we could find our way back to each other. Then he walked in. Chandler Green, the actor from that late-night show, the man who had somehow become a fixture in our lives without ever stepping foot in our home. He strode into the restaurant like he owned the place, and I felt Ruby tense beside me, her eyes widening as she stared at him. He noticed her, too, and before I knew it, he was standing at our table, flashing her a smile that made her blush like a schoolgirl. "Mind if I cut in?" he asked, his voice smooth, dripping with confidence. I opened my mouth to protest, but Ruby was already on her feet, taking his hand as he led her to the dance floor. I sat there watching them move together, feeling like a ghost in my own marriage. The glances they exchanged, the way her face lit up, it was as if I wasn't even there. After what felt like an eternity, Ruby returned to the table looking radiant, her eyes sparkling with a joy I hadn't seen in years. She took a sip of her drink, her voice casual. "That was Chandler Green," she said, as if that explained everything. I tried to brush it off to salvage what was left of the evening. But when I suggested we continue our dance, she shook her head, her gaze drifting back to where Chandler was standing at the bar. "I promised him the rest of my dances tonight," she said, her tone dismissive. I felt something break inside me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Ruby, this is our anniversary," I said quietly, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "It's just a dance, Thomas. Don't make a scene." I sat there, numb as she walked back to the bar, her focus entirely on Chandler. The rest of the night was a blur, a painful blur of stolen glances and forced smiles. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching my marriage slip away piece by piece and there was nothing I could do to stop it. In the counseling room, Ruby shifts uncomfortably beside me, her hands twisting in her lap. Dr. Weaver leans forward, her voice gentle. "Ruby, can you explain why you felt the need to connect with someone else, even if it was just through a dance?" Ruby's voice is barely a whisper. I felt invisible. I was a mother, a wife, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Chandler. He made me feel seen, if only for a moment. I closed my eyes, the bitterness rising in my chest. And what about me? Ruby? Did it ever occur to you that I felt the same way? That I needed to feel seen, too? She doesn't answer, her gaze fixed on her hands. The days following that fateful night felt like stepping into a parallel universe. One where the rules of our marriage no longer applied. I couldn't unsee the way Ruby's face lit up when Chandler walked into that restaurant or the way she dismissed me so effortlessly. It felt like I'd been holding on to a thin thread. And now that thread had snapped. For the first time in 17 years, I began to question if Ruby and I had ever truly known each other. When we got home the next morning, I stayed silent, hoping she would come to me, apologize, say something, anything that might give me a reason to believe this could still work. But the words never came. Instead, she slipped back into her routine. The same daily grind that had worn away at our relationship. Only now, she seemed more distant than ever. In the weeks that followed, I tried to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. I cooked dinner more often, planned small surprises, anything to remind her of the life we once shared. But each time she would offer me a polite smile, then retreat into herself, burying her head in her phone or disappearing into the kids' room. It was like trying to reach someone on the other side of a glass wall. And then one night, I stumbled upon the truth that shattered the last of my illusions. It was a Thursday evening. The kids were at Ruby's parents' for the weekend, and I was coming home late after a long day at work. I'd stopped by our local takeout place to pick up her favorite dish, Thai curry with extra spice, and was ready to surprise her with a quiet evening in, just the two of us. I even picked up a bottle of her favorite wine, hoping we could find some common ground. When I walked in, I heard her voice from the living room. She was on the phone, her voice low and intimate, tinged with a warmth I hadn't heard in months. I paused in the hallway, the takeout bag dangling from my hand, listening to the words that flowed so effortlessly from her. "Chandler," she whispered, her voice soft and vulnerable. "Last night was incredible. I've never felt like that before. No, he has no idea. I'll see you this weekend." The words slammed into me, each one sharper than the last. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I was hearing. Ruby, my wife, the mother of our children, was planning to spend the weekend with another man. And not just any man. Chandler Green, the actor who had swept into our lives like a storm, leaving destruction in his wake. I wanted to burst into the room to confront her, to demand answers. But instead, I stood there frozen, listening as she murmured words of affection to a man who wasn't me. When she finally hung up, I forced myself to move, walking into the living room as if nothing had happened. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly when she saw the takeout bag and the wine in my hands. "Oh, you're home," she said, her voice tense. "I didn't expect you this early." I managed a tight smile. Setting the bag on the coffee table. "Thought I'd surprise you. Picked up your favorite." She gave me a strange smile, avoiding my gaze as she opened the bag. I watched her, my chest tight with a mix of anger, hurt, and betrayal. I wanted to confront her, to tell her that I knew everything, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of hearing her admit it or the hope that she would come to me first, confess her mistake, and ask for forgiveness. But she didn't. Instead, she sat down on the couch. Her movements stiff and guarded as if she were sharing a meal with a stranger. We ate in silence, the air thick with tension, each of us pretending that nothing was wrong. By Friday morning, I couldn't take it any longer. The weight of the seeker was crushing me, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. When Ruby came downstairs, dressed and ready to leave, I stood in the kitchen, my arms crossed as I blocked her path. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the door. "I told you. I'm going to my friends for the weekend. Just a girls' night." "Funny," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I didn't realize girls' night included Chandler Green. Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for an excuse. A way out of the web she'd woven around herself. But there was no escape. The truth was out and there was no taking it back. "Thomas," she began, her voice trembling. "Don't," I interrupted. My voice sharper than I intended. "Don't insult me with excuses. I heard you on the phone last night. I know everything." She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she whispered. I needed something. Something more. Something more. I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "We have a family, Ruby. A life we built together. And you threw it all away for a man you barely know." Her shoulders shook as she looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice choked with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you," but the apology fell flat like ashes on my tongue. The damage was done, and there was no going back. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm, even as my heart shattered in my chest. "If you leave this house today," I said, my voice steady, "don't bother coming back, because if you walk out that door, I'm filing for divorce on Monday." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "You wouldn't watch me," I replied, my tone cold and unyielding. She stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to gauge whether I was serious. But there was no room for doubt. I meant every word. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing in the kitchen alone. The following Monday, I sat in my lawyer's office, filling out the paperwork that would officially end our marriage. The words blurred on the page, each stroke of the pen feeling like a betrayal of everything we'd once promised each other. But there was no other way. I couldn't live with a woman who had shattered my trust, who had chosen another man over our family. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, awkward phone calls, and uncomfortable conversations with friends and family. I had to explain to the kids why their mother wasn't coming home, why their lives were suddenly uprooted and turned upside down. I tried to keep things as normal as possible for them, but it wasn't easy. Sophie, our eldest, was old enough to understand that something was wrong. And the questions she asked tore in my heart. "Daddy, is Mommy coming back?" she asked. One night, her voice small and frightened. I forced a smile, my chest tight with the weight of the truth I couldn't share. "Mommy loves you very much, sweetheart. And no matter what happens, we'll always be here for you." But even as I said the words, I knew they rang hollow because nothing would ever be the same. As the weeks passed, Ruby's absence became a constant reminder of everything we'd lost. I heard from friends that she was struggling. That she'd moved in with her parents, too ashamed to face the world she'd once embraced. She tried to reach out to me a few times, leaving voicemails filled with tearful apologies and pleas for forgiveness. But I couldn't bring myself to listen to them. I'd given her everything, my love, my trust, my loyalty, and she'd thrown it away. There was nothing left for her to say. And so I moved on, picking up the pieces of my life one day at a time. I threw myself into work, into my role as a father. Determined to build a new life for myself and my children. I refused to let her betrayal define me, to let it consume me. But even as I tried to move forward, the pain lingered, a quiet ache that reminded me of everything I'd lost. The days following our divorce were like living in the aftermath of a storm. Everything familiar was gone, leaving only fragments of what used to be. I had gone through the legalities, signed the papers, and finalized custody arrangements. But as much as I tried to close that chapter of my life, it felt as though I was still haunted by everything we'd shared. And the children, they were the worst part. Sophie and Ethan looked at me differently now, their innocence replaced by questions I couldn't answer. For Ruby, the fallout of her choices became increasingly apparent. Friends stopped calling. Her social circle shrank, and the once welcoming community that had embraced her grew silent, their whispers echoing in every place she went. It was as if she'd become a ghost of her former self. A shadow that lingered on the periphery, isolated and alone. Ruby moved back in with her parents. Her tail between her legs, the vibrant, carefree woman I once knew now replaced by a hollow shell. Her parents, too, looked at her differently, their disappointment barely masked by forced smiles and half-hearted reassurances. They tried to comfort her, to tell her that everyone makes mistakes, but she could see the hurt in their eyes, the shame they felt for her actions. The kids were hesitant around her. Especially Sophie. Our daughter, who once idolized her mother, now avoided her gaze. The bond between them fraying with each passing day. Ruby tried to make it up to her, lavishing her with gifts and attention. But Sophie's resentment was palpable. She couldn't understand why her mother had chosen to leave, why her world had been torn apart because of a stranger who meant nothing to her. One evening, as Ruby sat alone in her parents' living room, surrounded by the familiar trinkets of her childhood, she felt a crushing weight settle over her. She had lost everything: her husband, her family, her place in the world. The reality of her choices hit her like a tidal wave, leaving her gasping for air as she realized just how far she had fallen. And yet, even in her regret, there was a stubborn pride that kept her from reaching out to me. She didn't want to admit that she'd made a mistake, that she destroyed our life for a fleeting moment of excitement. So, she suffered in silence. Trapped in a prison of her own making. Haunted by the memories of what could have been. While Ruby spiraled into regret and isolation, I began the slow process of rebuilding my life. The anger I felt toward her had subsided, replaced by a quiet acceptance that this was my new reality. I threw myself into work, focusing on my career and the stability it provided. I took on extra projects, spent long hours at the office, and poured my energy into something productive, something that reminded me I still had control over my life. But my healing process wasn't solely about work. I began to reconnect with old friends, people I'd lost touch with over the years, as I became consumed by marriage and fatherhood. They welcomed me back into their lives without judgment, offering support and understanding, without asking questions. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed those friendships, the easy camaraderie, and the simple joy of spending time with people who knew me outside the context of my marriage. Gradually, I began to let go of the resentment I'd harbored toward Ruby. I stopped replaying our last conversations, stopped dissecting every detail of our failed marriage. Instead, I focused on my own growth, on becoming the kind of father my children needed and the kind of man I wanted to be. I found peace in small moments. Watching a sunset, cooking a meal for the kids, playing catch with Ethan in the backyard. These were the things that mattered, the moments that reminded me of the life I still had. And then there was the Courtman-dated counseling. As part of our divorce settlement, the judge had ordered Ruby and me to attend a series of counseling sessions, ostensibly to improve our co-parenting relationship. I was initially resistant, wanting nothing more than to cut ties with her completely, but my lawyer advised against it, reminding me that refusing to participate could affect custody arrangements. So, reluctantly, I agreed. The first session was awkward to say the least. Ruby and I sat on opposite sides of the room, avoiding each other's gaze as Dr. Weaver introduced herself and outlined the goals of our meetings. She spoke about communication, cooperation, and the importance of setting aside personal grievances for the sake of the children. I could barely focus, my mind still reeling from the fact that I had to share this room with the woman who had betrayed me. Ruby looked as uncomfortable as I felt, her eyes fixed on her hands as she twisted a tissue between her fingers. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her guilt. And yet, there was still a part of me that wanted to reach out to bridge the gap between us. If only for the sake of our children. Dr. Weaver cleared her throat, drawing our attention. Thomas Ruby, I understand that this is difficult for both of you. But the goal of these sessions is not to relive the past. It's to focus on the future, to find a way to co-parent effectively. Ruby nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I just want to do what's best for the kids. The words stung, a reminder of everything she'd sacrificed in pursuit of her own happiness. But I forced myself to stay calm, to focus on the bigger picture. I wanted what was best for the kids, too. And if that meant putting aside my anger, then I would do it for them. Over the next few sessions, we began to talk slowly, cautiously, testing the waters of a new relationship built on shared responsibility rather than love. Dr. Weaver guided us through exercises designed to improve our communication, teaching us how to express our feelings without resorting to blame or resentment. At first, it felt artificial, like we were playing roles in a script. But gradually, as we continued to meet, I found myself letting go of the bitterness that had consumed me. I began to see Ruby not as the woman who had betrayed me, but as the mother of my children, a person who, despite her flaws, was trying to make things right. There were moments when the old anger resurfaced. Moments when I wanted to scream at her for everything she'd done. But I held back, reminding myself that this was about the kids, not us. And slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild a foundation of trust, not as husband and wife, but as co-parents. One evening after our fourth counseling session, Ruby asked if we could talk outside of the formal setting. She seemed nervous, her hands twisting in her lap as she waited for my response. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for another personal conversation with her. But something in her eyes, a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years, convinced me to agree. We sat down in a nearby cafe. The hum of quiet conversations and clinking cups filling the silence between us. "Thomas," she began, her voice barely audible. "I know I can't undo the damage I've caused. I know that, but I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. Truly deeply sorry." I looked at her, searching for any sign of insincerity. But all I saw was a woman who was haunted by her choices. A woman who was trying to make amends in whatever way she could. "I appreciate that, Ruby," I said, my tone even, "but apologies won't change what happened." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know. I wanted you to know that I regret it every day. I regret losing you. Losing us." The words hit me harder than I expected, stirring a mix of emotions I thought I'd buried. But as I looked at her, I realized that my feelings had changed. I no longer felt anger or bitterness. Instead, I felt a quiet acceptance, a sense of closure that I hadn't anticipated. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, my voice soft. "But I've moved on. Ruby. We both need to move on." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the table as she swallowed hard. I could see the pain in her eyes, the realization that the life we'd shared was truly over. And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace, a calm that came from knowing I'd done everything I could to make things right. With that final conversation, we both found a semblance of closure. We continued with our counseling sessions, focusing on co-parenting and creating a stable environment for our children. And as the weeks turned into months, we settled into a new rhythm, one that allowed us to coexist without bitterness, without resentment. 10 years have passed since our divorce, but some moments never truly fade. Life moved on, as it always does, and we each found our own way forward. Ruby and I managed to co-parent without any major conflicts, maintaining a respectful distance that allowed us both to heal. The kids adapted, their lives shaped by the quiet resilience they found amidst the upheaval of our separation. Sophie and Ethan grew up quicker than I expected. Sophie, our eldest, finished college last year and recently got engaged to a kind, hard-working man who reminds me of myself when I was young and optimistic. Ethan is still figuring out his own path, dabbling in different interests as he finds his way, and I couldn't be prouder of the young man he's become. Today, we're gathered for Sophie's wedding, a day that I've looked forward to with equal parts joy and apprehension. It's the first time Ruby and I have been together in years. and the weight of our shared history hovers in the background, unspoken, but ever present. I glance around the reception hall, taking in the laughter and warmth that fills the air. The tables are beautifully decorated, the dance floor filled with friends and family, and the soft strains of music play in the background. Sophie, radiant in her wedding gown, dances with her new husband, her smile bright and unrestrained. Seeing her like this, so full of life and happiness, brings a bittersweet ache to my chest. As I stand off to the side, a familiar figure approaches. Ruby, looking older and a little worn, but still carrying herself with a quiet grace. She's alone, her gaze shifting toward the dance floor where Sophie and her husband sway to the music. When she catches sight of me, she offers a tentative smile. "Thomas," she says softly, her voice barely audible above the music. "Ruby," I reply, nodding politely. We stand in silence for a moment, both of us watching our daughter sharing in her happiness despite the unspoken tension between us. "She looks beautiful, doesn't she?" Ruby whispers, her eyes filling with tears. "She does." I agree, feeling a pang of pride and nostalgia. "We did well, Ruby. Despite everything, we raised two incredible kids." She nods, swallowing hard as she wipes a tear from her cheek. "I always hoped that maybe one day we could, put the past behind us, maybe be friends." I consider her words, the sincerity in her eyes. 10 years ago, the thought of forgiveness seemed impossible. But now, standing here, seeing the life we've both built in the aftermath, I realize that forgiveness isn't just for her. It's for me, too. "I think we already have in our own way," I say, my tone gentle. "We're not the same people we were back then. And that's okay." Ruby nods, her gaze distant as she looks back at Sophie. "I never stopped regretting what I did, Thomas. Not a day goes by that I don't wish I could take it all back." I don't respond right away. The regret in her voice is genuine, and for the first time, I feel a deep sympathy for her. Life has a way of humbling us, of making us confront the mistakes we once thought we could brush aside. "I've made my peace with it," I reply. "Finally, the past is the past. All that matters now is that we're here celebrating Sophie and the life she's created for herself." A long silence settles between us, one that feels less awkward than it used to. I realize that in a strange way, I no longer feel anger toward Ruby. Instead, there's a quiet understanding. A recognition of the person she once was and the choices that brought us here. As the music shifts to a livelier tune, Sophie approaches us, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, Dad, you have to come dance with us," she exclaims, grabbing both our hands and pulling us toward the dance floor. I glance at Ruby, who looks as surprised as I feel, but neither of us protests. We join Sophie and her husband on the dance floor, our laughter mingling with the sound of music and clinking glasses. For a brief moment, it feels like old times, like the life we once shared. And in that moment, I realize that I can finally let go of the resentment, the bitterness. I can let go of Ruby, of the hurt she caused, and embrace the life I've built in her absence. As the song ends and we step off the dance floor, Ruby places a hand on my arm, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Thomas," she says, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything," I nod, offering her a small smile. "Take care of yourself, Ruby." And with that, we part ways. Each of us carrying the memories of our shared past, but no longer bound by them. For the first time in years, I feel a sense of peace, a lightness that tells me I've finally moved on. In the weeks following Sophie's wedding, I find myself reflecting on the journey that brought me here. Life is never simple, never as straightforward as we imagine it to be. We make mistakes, we hurt each other, and sometimes we lose the things we thought we'd have forever. But in the end, we also learn, we grow, and if we're lucky, we find a way to forgive not just others, but ourselves. Ruby and I still share a bond, a connection forged by the life we built together, even if that life didn't turn out the way we'd planned. And while we may never be friends, we are something more than strangers. We are two people who have loved, lost, and ultimately found our own paths to healing. As I watch the sun set over the horizon, I feel a quiet contentment settle over me. My life isn't perfect and it never will be, but it's mine. And for that, I am grateful. Because sometimes the most meaningful closure doesn't come from words or apologies. It comes from accepting the past, embracing the present, and looking toward the future with hope. And that, I think, is all any of us can ask.